My name is Richard Bennett. This is Indie Writers, and my guest is Walter Dale Harvey. And today we're going to talk about his book. No, I take that back. His father's book. His father wrote this book called A Life Worth Living, 2 Prayers and 6 Miracles. Now, Walter, you helped him put it together.
I did. I did all the cover artwork and found all the photos. I formatted the book. I edited the book to a great extent, along with the help of my brother Roland and his wife Kim. And then we kind of did this as a memento to my dad, so he would have that to give to his to us as his children and his grandchildren. And it's kind of his life story in a very small, short, 100-page book.
Your dad, when I read this book, and it's a very powerful book, by the way. A little small thing, only like 130 pages, but it's a powerful book about a man who comes out of poverty. Now, your father was a lot like my father. He's straight off the farm.
Oh, man.
And during the Depression.
Yeah.
And Georgia was practically destroyed by the Civil War.
Yeah.
And that's where. And your dad comes from the backwoods of Georgia.
Yeah, my father's grandfather was just dirt poor, and my grandfather himself couldn't read or write. And I found that out through my dad. The story about one time we went to Georgia and we were going to sign some contracts for his grandfather, and he put a big X on the piece of paper, and my dad initialed it. And I said, "Why did Grampy Harvey do that?" My dad said, "Because he can't read or write." So he was illiterate. People think that doesn't happen these days, but it happened a lot back then.
And that's where your dad. That's how your dad and family was raised.
Right, yeah, no one could read or write. My dad was the only one of 10, 10 if you can believe that, who actually graduated from high school. He
Whoa.
was the only one.
Whoa. Had a little determination to him.
Right, yeah, he was tough as nails.
And your grandmother, there's one little story here in the book that this is Walter's grandmother. One day, his dad, Walter's dad, went off and played hooky and decided to go fishing.
Oh, boy.
And he came home from fishing. He gave his mom the fish to clean. And the next day, he's going to go to school again. He's pretending he's going to go to school. And his mom says, Marvin, come here. So Marvin came here, and she just whaled him with a switch,
all the way to school. All the way.
And she walked him all the way to school after she whaled him. And she said, I've got so many sons, and they've got heads made out of rock. And you're the only one who's going to make something of himself.
So get to school.
And she took him to school, and eventually, Mr. Harvey did escape Georgia, and he went into the military.
Well, he escaped poverty in Georgia. It wasn't Georgia's fault, obviously. He escaped poverty and went in the military and actually became an officer. So it's a remarkable story, because here's a kid with no college degree, no officer training, no ROTC, nothing, and who couldn't read without glasses. He didn't get glasses until he was 26 years old. So he would look at the school board at school, the blackboard, and he'd walk up and memorize the entire board, and he would hold a book like this up to his face and memorize the story. So at school he could hold it like this and recite it verbatim, and the kids would make fun of him because he had to hold the book so close to read it. So he would memorize everything, and that's what got him the Army. He had an incredible photographic memory and could do things with his mind that were just amazing, and it helped him become an officer in the Army eventually.
Now, there are a lot of books out there that I found that have the title A Life Worth Living.
Yeah.
But this one has a subtitle, 2 Prayers and 6 Miracles. What were the 2 prayers?
The 2 prayers. One was my dad, his father, growing up, my grandfather, my dad's father, obviously, was an atheist. And my dad didn't believe that. And even though he got told that his whole life growing up, he didn't believe it for a minute. He said, there's just got to be something to this. And so someone pulled up in a buck wagon every Sunday and would say, anybody want to go to church? And my dad was the only one out of 10 who got in the wagon and went to church and did it every Sunday. And so that's the first prayer of his was he wanted a Christian home, because the home he was in was just abusive, alcoholism, and just it was terrible. And he didn't want that for any family of his. And so he prayed for a Christian home, and then he asked for a Christian wife, someone who would be, devoted to him and believed as he did. And so that was his 2 prayers.
Now, So your mom, Willie,
Yep.
she had a prayer in there too.
Yeah.
And that was basically hers was the same thing.
Yeah, hers was exactly the same thing, that she wanted a Christian home and a Christian husband who would be devoted to her and loyal to her and would dedicate his life to her.
So let's go over the 6 miracles. The first one is for to have a Christian home,
Right?
right? And the second one was for a husband, a good husband,
Right.
right? Okay. Now they got married. Your mom and dad got married back in the 50s.
Yep.
Then your dad got sent to Panama.
Yeah.
Right? And your mom hadn't learned how to drive yet.
Right.
But she had a little window there at one time to join her husband. Now, she had your brother Roland. Right after they got married, then Roland was born.
Yeah. Roland was born in 1954, and I was born in 59. My sister was born in 1964.
So when Roland was born, I guess your dad hardly even got to see Roland.
Right.
And so your mom made up her mind that they're going to join the family together.
In Panama, yep.
And she learned how to drive. Her father taught her, your grandfather. And then the next day, she packed up Roland and all her things and into a car.
Yeah.
And then she got on a Texas highway
Yeah.
and drove all the way to Louisiana.
New Orleans, yep.
And
And had never driven a car before in her life.
never driven a car, and it was just a wrecking story waiting to happen, a nervous wreck. And she managed to get to the base just, it was after time to load up the car. But the security guard let her in.
Yep.
And she got the car was loaded onto the boat.
Right.
And she and Roland flew to Panama, where they got their family back together. That was the second miracle.
Right.
Okay. And
There's a funny story about that second miracle that's not in the book, but my mom, there was an old driveway at my grandparents' house that, had a culvert on both sides, and it was, it was pretty narrow, and my mom somehow backed the car up and put all 4 wheels off just got the car straddled on the culvert and couldn't get it off the culvert. So.
holy cow! and she drove on a Texas highway.
Yeah. Well, she got the car off there finally. They towed it off there and finally got it back on the road and sent her on her way. But
Good
anyway.
Lord. The fourth miracle was that your dad became a warrant officer.
Yeah, this is back in the day where you had to work your way up the ranks, and you couldn't be an officer without really being in the military a very long time and without some kind of, background, ROTC or degree or something like that. And the story that my father's told me is that there was a process that they had these radio towers out in the jungle, and this process would take about 6 weeks for them to mount the radio towers, get a signal from them, and triangulate the position of everything and get it all situated so they could track where things were out in the jungle. And so he went in and took that 6-week process and did it in about 2 weeks, and nobody believed him. So he went out and did it again, and they're like, well, we need you to be doing this all the time. And so someone flew the Pentagon and said, all these people, this guy, he's going ahead of all of them, and he got promoted overnight to a warrant officer. Just like that, from an E5 to a warrant officer, which is unheard of.
Yeah.
And so my dad countered that as a miracle, and just was a warrant officer for the rest of his time in the military. And he left the Army with the warrant officer second class. There's only 4 classes of warrant officer, and he was the second class.
Well, he was
CWO2 is what they call it.
He had like 4 days left. Well, 2 or 4 days left. He wouldn't be eligible anymore.
Right.
And he got it right at the very end.
Right, right at the very end, yeah, because once you run out of eligibility, there's no promotions anymore. And so the guy literally flew to the Pentagon, flew to Washington, D.C., and said, this guy's the guy, you got to put him in there.
That was a big change for your family.
Oh, my goodness, because now in Panama, my mom had a servant, and we had officers' quarters. You need the officers' mess. I mean, you could go to the officers' mess. That was a big deal. And you got invited to all the parties, and you got promoted, and you got to do all these things that as an E5 or E4, whatever, you just...
The social class.
Yeah, it's the socialness of it, climbing the ladder, so to speak, in the military.
The fifth miracle was your sister Nettie had a birth defect.
Oh, it was terrible.
She was born with a condition that could only be fixed by maybe one or two doctors in the United States at that time.
Yeah.
You know.
And it was emergency surgery too. And in fact, they sewed her up and just said, well, take her home and let her die, and, I'm sorry. And she didn't die. She lived. I mean, her liver was on the outside, part of her intestines, and they basically just cut her stomach, from stem to stern. She still to this day has a scar the length of from the chest all the way down to her navel. She didn't have a belly button because they just took it out and cut her and stuffed everything back inside and just said, she's not going to make it, but take her home.
Well, they really gave up on her kind of easy, but your dad didn't give up.
No.
He said, I want to give her every chance in the world.
Yeah.
Said, the reason why she's here is because of me.
Took her home, and we took care of her, and we all had to do our part. We had to have the room at a certain temperature all the time, and she had to be held all the time. It had to be fed, with just teaspoons, and just it was a long, laborious year or so before she was out of the woods.
Well, and the military hospital at first just wanted to give up on her.
Yep. Yeah, they did.
But
they did.
But now, who takes care of your dad now?
My sister. Yeah, she really does an incredible job, and he's 90. He'll be 92 this year. Born in 1926, still kicking.
And he had a 25-year pastorate.
Yep.
That was I think that's one of the miracles, isn't it?
Yeah, it is that he became the pastor of this church that had nothing, and now it's still a going concern, the First Baptist Church of Pleasant Valley, and it's still there today.
One of the miracles, or may not be miracles, was that Mr. Harvey was practically the lone force who kept Camp Copus alive.
Yeah, and Camp Copus, people may not know it. If you go to a Baptist church and you're in Parker, Palo Pinto, Montague, Cook County, then those are the counties and the churches that support that camp. And it was going out of business. And we traveled to, it must have been 100 churches. And we'd hold up a brick and we'd say, we need more of these. And you can donate, you can help us. And so people donated, and we built a new dining hall, we built Palo Pinto Hall, and basically kept the camp from closing down and going out of business.
And now it's
it's huge now.
I'll post a picture up here, and
Yeah.
you'll get to see what it looks like.
Yeah, it's big. They're much better now. It's, year-round living conditions there with air conditioning and all the dorms, and yeah, it's a much better concern going now than it was then.
They were just going to close it up.
Yep, close it up, sell it off, and auction it. Yep.
Well, it's a powerful book. I recommend it. 2 thumbs up. Walter, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Richard, very, very much.